Hi there, I'm Jennifer Mention from The Pie, and welcome to our Country Spotlight on Vietnam. In the next hour, we'll have the latest insight from on-the-ground experts into national education landscape, TNE potential and appetite for outbound study. Now, Vietnam is an emerging TNE destination and also home to a large student population, many of whom consider studying abroad. We'll take the pulse of this dynamic education market from its language and school sector through to higher education. Joining me to do that, I'm thrilled to welcome Alex Green, Executive Director, Southeast Asia Global Services, Bruce Loc Do, Vice President of Ho Chi Minh City University of Economics and Finance, Vietnam, Chi Thuc Ha, Boarding School Advisor, Director of University Counselling, American Education Group in Vietnam, David Scott, the Managing Director of ELC Australia and SELC Career College and Fluent English Australia, Dr. Jeet Joshi, Associate Vice President and Dean of California State University, Long Beach, US, and last but certainly not least, Leanne Ta, Senior Education Services Manager with the British Council in Vietnam. Welcome, everybody. We are thrilled to have you here. We've got an hour, we've got a lot of questions, so let's kick off. Alex, I'll start with you. Can you tell me about how GROC works in Vietnam? I know you specialise in in-country support for global institutions. Is this something becoming more commonplace in the country?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So, hi, everyone. GROC provides the framework, infrastructure and support that allows institutions to deploy in-country staff. These staff are 100% dedicated to the institution they represent, who control their activities and their strategic direction. So I guess it's an approach for universities looking to manage their own international engagement without giving up control to a third party or having to establish their own legal presence. Staff are generally focusing on activities across various recruitment channels, managing agent networks, engaging with high schools, or developing partnerships with local institutions. And they exist essentially to extend an institution's reach into the market. And yes, we do see this becoming much more commonplace in Vietnam. It's not only been a rapidly growing market, but it's got certain demographic, cultural, and linguistic features that we think mean it's harder to penetrate without an in-country presence. And it's also particularly important for those institutions looking to diversify enrollment from China or India. Also in Vietnam, offline information about study abroad, word of mouth, still plays a really outsized role in the recruitment process and remains key in that decision-making process. So for us, that is a clear indicator that in-person recruitment activity, whether it's through in-country recruitment staff, education agencies, or both, is an essential part of any successful recruitment strategy. So our staff in our office in Ho Chi Minh City, they've been working, I think, much more intensively with students and families throughout the pandemic, counselling them on a one-to-one basis. And families do look to them as local Vietnamese staff for their knowledge and their experience above maybe other forms of information online. Talking to them in their own language, a phone conversation is going to be more readily trusted than those online sources of information. So for us, it's really clear that institutions that have got people on the ground have benefited during the pandemic as restrictions have been lifted, as physical recruitment activity picks up again, and as travel into the country is still not possible for most. So those that can engage in those traditional forms of recruitment are going to, I think, have a continued advantage. So if you have in-country staff, it's important to ensure they're well trained to deal with potential applicants and families, but also if you haven't engaged in Vietnam or are worried that you can't, then the message from us is that now is a particularly good time to consider that.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Jeet, I'd like to ask you about your history of working with Vietnam and how has the way you work in Vietnam changed over time?
I will start with where Long Beach is located. Long Beach is in the southern tip of the Los Angeles County, adjoining Orange County. So Orange County and Long Beach has the largest Vietnamese diaspora community. It is said that this is the area where there's most Vietnamese outside of Vietnam, the largest community outside of Vietnam. So we have a lot of family connections, a lot of networks and all that. But then from an institutional point of view, we started back in 2006-07 work. So it's been really quite a long time working with a university in Hanoi, the National Economics University in Hanoi. and a second one, the Hanoi Medical, University. How it started is that the Vietnamese government had something called the Advanced Education Program, AEP. And the premise of that program was to adopt American curriculum into the program that they have. So in the beginning, we started with the accounting program and then moved on to finance program. So how it works is that they have a cohort of students in National Economics University that would enroll as a cohort in a lockstep, and it is all taught in English. Often the course numbers are exactly the same as in Long Beach. So accounting 100 is accounting 100 in NEU as well as in CSULB. So we started with that, but then it really developed into something wonderful and continues to this day. We have not only completed both programs in accounting and finance, full 4-year degree program has been converted into the curriculum that is very similar to the Cal State Long Beach program. And then we had just begun before the pandemic into the supply chain management, the third cohort, and with the pandemic, we couldn't do what we wanted to do at the time, but we're hopeful that we're going to start very soon with it. And with that, it started with our faculty members being in residence in National Economics University, and the NEU faculty being in residence in Long Beach. And then we started with the student exchange. So study abroad on both sides, began. Cohort of students went from Long Beach to NEU, and NEU students, came to Long Beach. So it led from one to the next thing to the next thing, and it has become a very strategic partnership between NEU and Cal State Long Beach. And for about 4 years, we also worked with the Hanoi Medical University in converting the exact same program. This was a government-funded program at the time, converting the nursing degree in Hanoi Medical to the nursing degree in Cal State Long Beach to articulate all of the curriculums in all of the courses. And once that got completed, we ended the partnership with Hanoi Medical. But with NEU, it continues to this day. And it has been a fruitful partnership from an institutional perspective on both sides. So we continue to work with them. We just, we really had 4 faculty members in residence last year, and 3 of them were able to return, but one of them kind of got stuck here, with the pandemic and all that. But we were able to do some virtual exchange between the faculty members. So it's been a long partnership, and it's really from an exchange perspective, not just the student, not just the faculty, but the curricular exchange and the articulation that has happened between the 2 universities, wonderful. And we will probably enter into similar, although AEP has ended, in terms of funding, the program still exists. The universities itself funds those programs. So we're in conversation with a few others on that.
Oh, well, we'll watch this space. Thank you, Jeet. Leanne, can you tell us about your work and the scope of your role within the British Council? I know the British Council is active in producing webinars and engaging with industry too. So can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing?
Yes, Jen. So I have been working for British Council for nearly 15 years in the areas of UK education promotion and partnership. So since 2014, I led the International Education Services Strand of British Council, and we supported UK institutions in terms of student recruitment and partnership development in Vietnam. So we implemented a lot of marketing campaigns, broker relationships in terms of partnerships, mainly for TNE purpose. Also provided a lot of market intelligence, consultancy and research reports. So in April 2019, we produced a report focusing on TNE in Vietnam. So that report aimed to advise UK institutions about regulations, the market situation, the demand, the subject areas in demand, and also the most popular types of TNE in Vietnam. And the report showed that Vietnam is relatively strong market for TNE because we have the open policies from the Ministry of Education. We have the increasing interest and demand of local institutions in building TNE programs with foreign partners, and we have positive attitudes and perceptions from students and parents about TNE as a pathway for them to get the foreign qualification. And also that report highlighted the importance of finding the right local partners as well as the right subject areas in the competitive TNE market in Vietnam. So that's just only one among many other research projects that we have done about TNE in Vietnam.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll come back and chat a little bit more about that later. Now I'd like to go to David, and it would be great to understand more about your business and background. You've got a great scope on the rollout of English language learning in Vietnam. Can you please tell us more?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been involved in English language teachings for nearly 30 years, teaching around the world in many different countries. I was involved in teacher training, course book writing, and in 2003, I opened my own school with my wife here in Sydney called English Language Company, ELC. And really, the first 10 years of the business here in Australia was quite successful, and we decided that we wanted to try our hand at international expansion. So we experimented a bit in franchising in Russia, but that was a very difficult environment to operate in. And it came to a pretty swift end after a couple of years. So in about 2010, we started to look a little bit closer to home. And Vietnam was a country that caught our eyes, as did Malaysia. And since then, we've established businesses in a number of Asian countries, principally Vietnam and Malaysia, but also Taiwan. So for us, the real demand for English language learning is in countries like Vietnam, with a population of 92 million and a very fast developing economy. And also what made it very attractive for us was that the cost of doing business is so much lower in there than in, for example, in Australia. If you look at staff costs and rent costs, etc. So I actually took the plunge and moved my family to Vietnam in 2010 to see what we could do. And we lived there for 3 years. And my kids went to an international school, and we set about exploring business opportunities. And there really did seem to be unlimited demand for our type of expertise in English language teaching. And the obvious choice at that stage seemed to be to open our own language center in Ho Chi Minh, which we looked at doing. But we very quickly decided against that. And we instead started an inbound teacher recruitment business, which is still running today. So basically what we do is we recruit newly qualified TEFL teachers, mostly from the UK actually, and we bring them all to Vietnam in big groups at one time, let's say 150 at a time. And we place them for one term as English teachers in public and primary and secondary schools in Vietnam. So it's like a fully supported program, and we have staff on the ground in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City troubleshooting, and we provide academic support remotely. And to date, since 2012, we've brought in about 2,000 English teachers to Vietnam on this program. So that was the first thing we did. Then, we got a bit braver as we started to understand the business environment. And in 2015, we opened the first branch of our English school, ELC, in Vietnam. And it's located inside a large and well-known private university. So all the students are from within the university, and we don't really compete with all the cheap and cheerful high street language centers which are there, which would be impossible. And this venture and this partnership with the university is actually going really well because the university is an excellent partner. So the final thing we did was in the end of 2019, we started to work in the EdTech sector in Vietnam. So we're currently selling an EdTech program in quite a niche area. It's a B2B product. So we sell to schools, not directly to parents or students. And it's basically a teaching platform for English and 21st century skills for children aged 2 to 6. So it's going pretty well. So we're involved in recruitment. We're involved in an English language school in Ho Chi Minh City. And we're now also involved in EdTech in Vietnam. And I guess I've been there about 75 times over the years trying to get it all together, but it's a great place to work.
Fantastic. David, I'm just going to stay with you. Is there a big disparity between private and public sector institutions? As I understand, you work with both systems?
Yes, very much so. Look, in public, let me start with public. All educational activities in Vietnam are basically overseen in a centralized system with the Ministry of Education and Training, or MOET as it is known, in Hanoi at the top. This is the national level, if you like. But this doesn't mean that you can get your embassy or your consulate officials from your country to set up high-level meetings and receive approvals and go ahead as you please in Vietnam. It's not that simple. Basically, a nice MOU with the ministry doesn't mean much on its own. So at a more local level of government, you need to deal with the Department of Education, or DOIT, for approvals. Then there are local, provincial, or city authorities to deal with as well on a government level. And finally, you need to deal directly with the school or the university heads as well. So, at any of these stages, your plans could come crashing down, and very often will. So really, to succeed, and what I mean by succeed is to get your program or product up and running successfully, it's very complex, I believe, in the public sector without local knowledge and without local partners. And in my mind, basically, you have no chance without the right local partners. In fact, they say in Vietnam that as a foreign company, you have to take a beating before you can be successful. And I have seen this to be true in many cases. You can't just waltz in thinking you have the best product and you will succeed. You really need to do your research and really develop a good understanding of the local way of doing things and pick your partners very, very carefully. Now, it's much easier to work in the private sector, and they will become your local partner, and they will help you navigate the hurdles and difficulties thrown up by government departments, as well as other private sector competitors. So really, all you have to do is choose the right local partner.
Okay, well, thank you. I can see why you've taken 75 trips over to get everything set up. So thank you very much.
Yes.
Bruce, I'd like to direct a question to you now. To what extent does your institution see itself as a global university?
Thank you, Jenny. And I believe that David had just mentioned the importance of English language in Vietnam. First, for us, I think that we use the local language in teaching and learning. English in Vietnam is, not the first language, not even the second language. It's still a foreign language. But at our university, it's the main language of instruction. And because we recruit students from different regions of the country, where some of them have very limited exposure to English communication. So we provide our students with intensive ASU English program at the beginning of the first year, so that they can catch up with the English language in the classroom with international professor. And we even offer free classes for students who have very limited English proficiency. So our students need to have an IELTS 5.5 to graduate from the local program, and the IELTS 6 for our UK program. So number one, the English language, and number two is that we offer a variety of flexible and international academic pathway. We call it the bilingual track for the local program and the international track for the UK program. So our students can choose to study in Vietnam, or can choose to transfer to one of our 20 university partner in our network, with located in the US, the UK, Australia, Finland, Switzerland, Spain, and Japan. So, they can also get the double degree option, where they can get the 2 degrees at the same time at UEF and University of Applied Science of Central in Finland, and UEF and City University of Seattle in USA. And lastly, I think that we also offer them many international on-campus activity, semester abroad, international summer school, international student exchange, and intercultural visit. So we help our students to expose to higher education as much as they can.
Okay, thank you. Now, you did touch on this, but would you like to elaborate a little more about your international student cohort? Can you describe them to us?
Sure. Well, we have around 500 students enrolled in our UK program that we're in partnership with University of Gloucestershire and Leeds Trinity University. So they can choose to study in Vietnam and get a UK degree without leaving the country, or they can complete half of the program there and then transfer to the UK. And we are working on a plan to develop similar program with the American university partner this year. So I think that's for Vietnam compared to our neighbors, such as Malaysia or Singapore or Hong Kong. Vietnam is not yet a popular destination for international students to pursue a degree, but Vietnam is an attractive place for them to spend some time during their college year. So we try to diversify our student population by short-term program like that, like summer school, international visit, or student exchange.
Okay, thank you. Leanne, I'd like to come back to you. In what sector across secondary schools, language learning, vocational and higher education do you see most partnership-based activity occurring?
I think in my observation, the international partnership activities have been happening in almost all the education sectors that you had mentioned. However, because I worked more closely with the local universities, so I can see a lot of international partnerships happening in the higher education sector. I think the reason is because our Ministry of Education have outlined very clearly the priorities in internationalizations of higher education. So they put out the priorities like first, local universities have to improve education and research quality. Local university also need to increase mutual recognition of qualifications that support the credit transfer activities. Our universities also encouraged to increase transnational education activities like building more joint training programs with high quality partners, and also try to improve the institutional ranking at regional and international level. So we can see that a lot of international partnerships activities have been done by our universities. For example, doing more joint research projects, doing international conference, international publications, also developing new TNE programs with new partners in new subject areas, and also doing more student exchange activities with foreign partners. Of course, many of those activities have been done before the impact of COVID-19. Having said that, I think in some other education sectors, for example, in school sector, we also see more partnership activities because our Ministry of Education also encourage more international collaboration and more high quality education programs in this sector. So we have some public schools start to teach foreign curriculum like A-level in parallel with the national curriculum. More private schools now are proactive in delivering foreign curriculum in partnership with international education organizations, for example, delivering the foundation of pathway programs. Also, in the vocational sector, we have a group of 45 high quality colleges, vocational colleges now delivering vocational curriculum of Australia and Germany. And we started to see more partnership among these vocational colleges with their foreign partners in terms of English language training, because improving the English level for vocational students is one of the priorities of our vocational education sector in order to push internationalization activities in that sector. So I can see that the international partnership activities are now happening in a very diverse way in all the education sectors in Vietnam.
Definitely. Now, Jeet, you mentioned your partnerships and the work that you're doing. What makes you excited about delivering programs in country and working with Vietnamese counterparts?
Well, all of the work that we have done with several universities one thing that we find is our partners at our institutions, the commitment from the top, and expanding on what we have done. So, for example, as I was explaining about the partnership we have with NEU in Hanoi, we have engaged in the assessment piece of it, which is, in the beginning, we found that to be a new concept in Vietnam. So, in working with the faculty members and bringing the faculty cohorts from both institutions, the program that we're working in Vietnam, they aspire to get the AACSB accreditation for their business program. So we began to, address what are the assessment process, what are the kind of things that they need to institute before they get into that accreditation process. And what is exciting is that the faculty members that we have worked with, the deans and even the upper administration, they recognize there is a lot of work to do, which makes it a lot easier for us to engage and provide the input, and also in the meantime learn a lot from their perspective of what assessment is. So it's been a process that we have learned from each other to a great deal. So it's not just that we're kind of telling our partners, you need to do this, you need to do that, but that in the process we have begun to learn why a certain things needs to be done a certain way. So because the institutional cultures are different, the educational environment is different. Certainly, as David mentioned, there's a lot of issues with MOET in terms of the policy and the approval, and it takes time. But the eagerness of our partners, of all levels, is so great that we have been able to really see the results. So it's quite exciting to work with the universities directly, and that we can create an environment there is a win-win situation that we have been able to do. So Vietnam is a tremendous market, a tremendous country right now. It is rising up in all sectors, and education is one of the key sectors. And they recognize they have work to do, and that's what makes it easy for us to get into the kind of productive partnership that we always look for.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you. Now, something Leanne touched on and we haven't really spoken about is the secondary schooling. And Chi, thank you for being very patient and waiting there. I'd like to ask you, how big is the overseas secondary school placement market, in your opinion?
This is a really interesting question and something that I have been working on boarding schools and universities for about 10 years now in Vietnam. And at AEG Vietnam, our college business grew out of our boarding school business. Originally, we started as a boarding school secondary placement, and college consultancy is now the fastest growing segment of our business. It's no longer boarding school. And so actually what's surprising for me was that our college consultancy business was not at all affected by COVID. Same number of contracts, same number of parent-student interest, but our boarding school and our day school consultancy has been affected. And I would estimate that this year, we are looking to send probably somewhere around the neighborhood of about half the usual volume that we would normally send. And similarly, as you would expect, this means that international schools in Vietnam now are reporting that they are completely full for the upcoming semester, and they actually have waiting lists when usually they'd be dealing with students and expat families leaving from all grades throughout high school. Interestingly, what we've seen at AEG Vietnam is that there's been a significant uptick in prospective border client meetings right after the Lunar New Year holiday, which was in February. And it's as if parents saw President Biden's messaging to attempt to immunize most everyone by June, and took this as a sign that it is now safe to send our child to the United States and to Canada again. And so we actually expect to be talking to a lot more day and boarding high schools for second round admissions than at any point in the past 20 years. But to get back to your question in terms of size, the boarding and day school secondary market in Vietnam is actually pretty interesting, and it's segmented according to what kinds of institutions families are interested in. And in my mind, it's pretty much split between traditional boarding school environments, brick halls, chapels, Ivy halls, mostly residential, smaller day schools with a host family structure, mostly students on financial aid, schools with a strong religious affiliation, mostly Catholic and mostly in Saigon. And we are actually seeing a small but increasing interest in sports academies, mostly located in Florida.
Okay, interesting. It sounds like there is a lot of appetite there and room for growth. The agency market in Vietnam is notably dynamic, with lots of operators and active student fairs and counselling events. What would your advice be for institutions who don't yet work in Vietnam?
Jennifer, that's another really great question. Actually, I'm going to quote judiciously from a report that just came out from the Enrollment Management Association on trends in secondary school admissions and matriculation. And there are four really interesting points that I want to address. First, families of international students are 5 times more likely to use a consultant than a domestic student. Secondarily, families of international students do a lot more research. 80% do research for over a year, and 45% do research for over 2 years before actually applying. And you can actually break this down even further to see where they're getting their information from. And as others have said, websites are a distant third, current and alumni parents and students are a strong first, and a close second, consultants. Third, international students submit statistically more applications than domestic ones. And so this will definitely affect yield when you're looking to matriculate more international students. And fourth, and finally, international families have really, what we've noticed now than ever before, 2 very different concerns when considering a secondary school. First, as expected, academic rigor and college placement. And number 2, this was relatively new, safety. So 51% are now more concerned about bullying in Western secondary schools, and 44% are afraid of anti-Asian racism. So really the number one point that I want to make for institutions that are interested in growing their international market, especially in Vietnam, is to find trusted partners, contacts, and networks. And this is incredibly important. And the statistics show this.
Wow, that's a very interesting insight. Thank you, Chi. David, how would you characterise the view of Vietnamese on post-secondary study opportunities globally?
Yep. There are 2 major influencing factors here, I think, Jennifer. And firstly, as Lien touched on, it's the stated goals of MOET, the Ministry of Education, which are internationalizing education, improving English levels, promoting transnational cooperation, and even promoting study abroad. So, from a government perspective, they're definitely encouraging students to go abroad. But I think more important than government directives are the fact that Vietnam is currently one of the most dynamic outbound student markets in the world. There's a surging economy, or at least there has been, with a very young and growing population who want to be part of the global economy. And there is a little bit of a lack of high-quality, top-tier universities in Vietnam. And there's certainly inadequate foreign language training. And I think these things drive study abroad as well. So I'd say that combination of factors have resulted in a positive view of global post-secondary opportunities. But I might also predict that, a little bit like China, as educational opportunities improve onshore in Vietnam, there may be less inclination to study abroad, given the enormous expenses involved as well, which is a big factor in a country like Vietnam. I mean, it costs a lot of money, and families give their life savings to their children studying abroad. But I'd say that this is probably maybe 20 or 30 years off to become more like China, where a lot of people are staying at home. That's what I think. But currently, post-secondary outbound student market is fantastic, Vietnam.
Okay, thank you. Bold prediction there. I look forward to watching that. Alex, we've been talking about COVID. From your perspective, from your point of view, I guess, how's COVID-19 impacted in Vietnam? What's the state and trend of the economy?
Thanks, Jennifer. As David alluded to, Vietnam is really bucking the downward trend of most Asian major economies, even during the pandemic. And it's one of the only economies in the region, along with Taiwan and China, that actually grew last year at over 2%. That's down from average of 6% every year since, I think, 2012. And the government set a target this year of 6 to 6.5. A lot of people are predicting it's probably going to be even higher than that. David mentioned as well the middle class. It's 30 million, and it's going to grow from probably around 20% to 50% as a proportion of the overall population. And consumption is driving GDP here, and education is a product that is in high demand at all levels, as other panelists mentioned. I think Vietnamese families are spending billions of US dollars on study abroad a year, and it counts for nearly half of total household expenditure. Demographics in Vietnam are also fantastic and in the country's favor. Population growth, and unlike, I think, some of its regional Asian neighbors, it isn't going to be affected by the aging population that many of those markets are facing, at least for another couple of decades. I think that's not going to happen. It will become an upper middle income country in the next few years, and there's tons of infrastructure projects planned, roads, airports, and its status as a manufacturing hub, which is kind of the reason for its performance last year, is only going to increase with export demand going up, and the supply chain relocation or diversification out of markets like China. I think just because Vietnam remains less affected than other places by the pandemic, it doesn't mean there isn't going to be an impact on student parent sentiment. As Chi mentioned, there are concerns around safety, perceptions of safety during different destination countries' response to the pandemic last year. I don't know what others think, but I probably doubt that this crisis is going to dent the desire to study abroad. If we look back at 2008 with the financial crisis, we actually saw a spike in outward mobility from the country. So it's likely that students are going to continue to view study abroad as an opportunity, also maybe to become more competitive if there is a contraction in the job market. So it is a fantastic success story, especially in the last year, but also the future, is extremely bright, whatever way you look at it.
Okay, great. Now, just to go on from that, in terms of outbound study, you've got a pulse for the demand. What's the relative market volume for different destination countries?
Sure. So I'm going to be talking generally in stock numbers, so students in country rather than new entrants. There's around 130,000 Vietnamese studying overseas. The top countries still remain the US and Australia, who account for half the higher education market at least. The US has enjoyed 18 consecutive years of growth. Vietnam is the sixth largest country of origin for the US, currently around 25,000 Vietnamese students studying there. Most of them undergraduate, 70%, 15% graduate, 10% OPT, and 5% on non-degree programs. Jeet mentioned the huge Vietnamese diaspora in the US, and it has enjoyed the dominance and reputation in Vietnam built on that and historical connections. Also worth noting that for the past decade, Vietnam's been the second source of students for US community and associate colleges. So a big chunk of students are opting for those institutions. The next actual biggest proportion of students stay within Asia. So Northeast Asia, mainly Japan, have a big number of students studying at tertiary institutions, but many, many more on short-term language programs and short-term qualifications. South Korea also has a few thousand. Australia is performing well. It's about 30,000 students there, half of which are in higher education. And 2/3 of those are in just two cities, Sydney and Melbourne. Canada has enjoyed rapid growth in recent years. It's the fifth largest group of international students in the country, about 21,000 or so, half of those in higher education. The UK comes lower down the list, actually behind France, obviously historical connections with that country. They have around 4,000 students in the UK, about 3,500. New Zealand has around 3,000 Vietnamese students, half of that in higher education and the rest of it focused on schools. Most of these markets have a bias towards undergraduate studies. So most Vietnamese students are on undergraduate programs, with the exception of the UK, where postgraduate remains slightly more popular. And I think what's interesting, and I was talking to some of the other panelists about this, is that in Southeast Asia generally, there's a lack of buyer loyalty, where students are statistically much more likely to consider a range of destinations when they're making their decision about study abroad. It's not unusual for them to be thinking about an institution in London, in Sydney, in New York at the same breath, especially if they've come from, say, an international curricula at an international school. And I think we may see that intensifying in Vietnam as well. It'll be very interesting to see what the numbers are this year, whether market share is a little bit more evenly distributed, perhaps. But last year, obviously, everyone would have taken a hit in terms of numbers and growth. But as I said before, the future, very stable sources of students from most of the destination countries, and the importance of Vietnam as a counterbalance to China and to India is only going to increase from Brock's perspective.
Okay, thank you. Back to in-country and COVID, Vietnam has appeared to fare quite well. Bruce, tell us how you reacted and adapted to COVID-19 and what parts of the process have been most instructive or useful for you?
Thank you, Jennifer. And with almost 100 million people and with a long border with China, but Vietnam has only around 2,500 confirmed COVID-19 cases and 35 deaths as of today. So I think Vietnam is one of the few countries the world has success in its fight against the coronavirus. But like the other country that we still the education sector has been affected by the nationwide school closure. And I think it was an opportunity for us to review our online training capacity. Online learning has been proposed in Vietnam for a year, but received very little enthusiasm from the public, from students, even teachers, school management. And teacher and student found it difficult to maintain the online learning and teaching due to the lack of infrastructure and the regulation. So we don't have any formal instruction on how to run the online classroom, for example, how to give grade, how to assess the student performance until the COVID-19. So it never exists. So however, in order to respond to the COVID-19, the government has issued two important documents. The first, we call it the 795, that to encourage higher education institutions to apply the distance teaching to the traditional classroom. And the second document we call the 988, that guiding higher education institutions to maintain, to ensure the quality of distance teaching during the COVID time. So I think that COVID-19 is an opportunity for us, for university and the government to review and strengthen our online training capacity regarding to the national policy, the legal framework, and also the infrastructure. Yes.
So a bit of a silver lining from COVID. That's always good to hear. Speaking of new rules, Leanne, I'm wondering if you can tell me about a new rule that we understand recognises foreign curriculums on an equal footing with domestic institutions. What will that mean?
Thank you, Jennifer. I think you want to refer to the regulations set out by our Ministry of Education last year in terms of the high school graduation examination. So in that regulation, the main purpose of the school graduation examination is to recognize the students, the 12 years of education of students, rather than to enroll students into the local universities. And our universities now are allowed to use a combination of the having their own assessment methodologies, as well as using the results of the high school graduation examination to enroll students. And another major point in that regulations, and I think this also responds to the impact of COVID-19, is that it allows students who study a foreign curriculum at high schools in Vietnam to take the university entrance exam if the curriculum is recognized and at the same level as the curriculum in Vietnam. So I think there are some very important impact of these regulations. First, it offers the flexibilities for our students who study foreign curriculum at high schools to have options of either they can go to study abroad or they can enroll in domestic universities. And therefore, I think it can also encourage the TNE at school level here. It means that the schools also encouraged to offer more foreign curriculum in parallel with the national curriculum, because the students who study those foreign curriculum have more options when they choose a university education. The second impact of the regulation is that due to the impact of COVID-19, we can see more Vietnamese students and their parents now choose to study a foreign bachelor degree programs in Vietnam. So that regulations provide more opportunities for our local university here, I mean the Vietnamese university here to strengthen their student recruitment for their TNE programs. And of course, the TNE programs at graduate level. Last year, some Vietnamese universities reported that the number of applications that they received for their TNE programs double the target that they expected. So I think that those regulations will continue to be applied for this university entrance examination this year.
Okay, and following on from that, Chi, how do you foresee student and parent demands and expectations changing in a post-COVID world?
On the one hand, I don't think it's going to change, right? I mean, Vietnam's population of college age or about to college matriculate young adults, 25% of Vietnam's population of 95 million are between the ages of 16 and 30. And Vietnamese families are spending on average $3 to $4 billion per year preparing and sending their children to study abroad. And finally, BCG actually released this really interesting report a couple of years ago about the growth of high net worth individuals or individuals and families with net assets over $30 million. Within the past 5 years, Vietnam has ranked #1 in producing the most number of new net high worth families. And I think right now Vietnam is actually 3rd or 4th. So on the one hand, I don't think it's changing at all. What is changing is what this looks like and how does this play out in the international landscape. Number one, geography. This is going to change. Families are now much more geographically adventurous and they're applying everywhere. They have preferences, they're oriented towards a particular country, but they're open to changing their mind. Number two, I feel that families now are much more cost aware, even for the full pickings. They're looking around more, they're interested more universities that have partnerships, especially those closer to Asia, because it might have a better impact in the future in terms of their child's economic and job advantage. Third, especially in the United States context, OPT was somewhat of an issue because there were so many international students who were stranded studying online, and this had a really big impact on OPT for students who are juniors and seniors right now. Fourth, students are submitting more applications everywhere, and this is the statistic that we've seen. Colgate University received 102% more applications this year than ever before. Harvard, I believe, is up 54%. And so this means that yield will diminish and waiting lists will get much longer. In the short term, between fall 2021 and fall 2022, I really am interested to see what admissions looks like, yield looks like, matriculation looks like, and how this bleeds into fall 2022 matriculation, fall 2023 matriculation, because many students are already talking about a gap year.
I think we'll all be keeping our eye on the statistics in the future and from the last 12 months to just see how everything does shift. We've almost reached the end of our session, but we have enough time. So I'd like to pose one question to each of you. Maybe we'll start with you, Leanne. Can you tell us from your perspective some key factors or maybe observations on Vietnam's education landscape and how it's evolving?
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. I just want to highlight two key factors. In my opinion, the first thing, with the fast growing middle income class and the positive attitude towards overseas higher education qualifications, I think Vietnam will continue to be a potential market for new TNE partnerships in new subject areas and also in new models such as online and blended TNE. Our Ministry of Education has launched a circular that allows the delivery of blended TNE at master and PhD level and online TNE at undergraduate level. And I think that circular provides a very good foundation for the development of new ways of TNE delivery in Vietnam in the future. And I think the second factor is that the Vietnamese government has launched the National Digital Transformation Program, in which the digital transformation in education is one priority. So our local universities will need very soon to be more proactive in adopting the digital platforms, adopting the new teaching tools, changing the teaching methodology, as well as building the digital ecosystem in their teaching and learning environment to meet with the requirements of the digital transformation process. And they also need to ensure that they can train students with the digital transformation knowledge and skills so that their students can meet with the increasing demand of human resources in the fields of digital economies. And I think this is also a potential area for more international partnerships in Vietnam, both at the systematic and institutional level. So, in my point of view, the Vietnamese higher education sector will become more digitalized, and Vietnam continue to be a potential market for TNE.
Leanne, thank you. Jeet, 60 seconds you have to give me maybe a key observation or prediction.
Well, I will stay on the higher education sector. What I have observed is that the funding mix from the government to the universities seems to have changed in recent years. The government is empowering the universities to become more entrepreneurial and generate its own revenue by decreasing the government support to the universities. So there is a degree of concern among the universities. Some will thrive. They will be more entrepreneurial and they will generate the kind of revenue that they need onto themselves, while there is a decrease from the government support. But others may not be able to do so, and there is a concern among the colleagues that I speak that they might not be as successful as everyone is trying to bring up the quality of the institutions. So there is a degree of concern there. But what that might do is that the institutions will become much more entrepreneurial in a way that they might create new partnerships with international universities. The faculty research might blossom because of that, and then creating another source of revenue for the universities. Because there is a direct correlation between how the universities are supported and how the quality and the infrastructure of the university, sustained infrastructure of the university, could be maintained. So there is some degree of misplacement of priority, so to speak. But in the meantime, I would say that the institutions are, from the ones that I have worked with, are quite resilient, quite entrepreneurial, and I do think that it will continue to be a place for faculty collaboration, research collaboration, publications who are doing all of that on our front. I think Vietnam will continue to be a country where foreign institutions would look for that kind of opportunities.
Thank you very much. Now, Bruce, staying in the higher education sector, your final thoughts?
Yeah. So I think the government commitment to improving education, our young population, and the rising of the middle class offer the great opportunity for investment. The first is since 2000, I think our country government has committed approximately 15 to 20% of the public expenditure on education, one of the highest in Southeast Asia. And second, Vietnam has the third largest population in Southeast Asia and very young age structure. I say within 40% of them are in the young age, the golden demographic, within below 24 years old. And the last one is the the domestic education usually fail to meet the international standard. So high-income family, they prefer to educate their children abroad or send to private or international school. So for example, Ho Chi Minh City, where I live, is one of the 27 cities in the world that has more than 50 international schools. So I think that with the rising of the rapid rising of the middle income family, Vietnamese people will be able to pay more for their children, to provide their children with the high quality education. So the three factors combined have translated into a strong demand for the quality education and a strong market for private education and services, I think.
All right, thank you, Bruce. Now, David, from your perspective, you've got about 40 seconds, so hit us with it.
I agree that, and there's no doubt that there's a growing middle class in Vietnam who can afford international education and study abroad, etc. But as Lien touched on or expressed, I know that the government's priority is the digitalization of education. And I think what's really, really going to be important in the near future is affordable quality edtech solutions so that they can reach all of the children in primary school in public and private sectors, that they'll all get access to the good quality products. And I think this is a direction that, I mean, we're following it now. I think it's a focus of the Ministry of Education to get to the whole country through the use of technology and digitalization. And I think that's a major program coming for Vietnam, and one that people would be interested in getting involved in if they have ed tech products, for sure.
Excellent, thank you. And Alex, we began with you. Let's finish with you. Your key observation on Vietnam's education landscape.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I see the marketplace becoming more and more competitive, and maybe the traditional destinations losing part of their market share, and so I do think COVID has maybe accelerated that and shaken things up. As many of the other panelists have mentioned, there's momentum domestically to develop higher education options and TNE, and that's another form of competition from a student recruitment perspective. There's also, I think, we're going to see more momentum for regional mobility. I mentioned the Asian markets; they're stepping up their own game in terms of recruiting Vietnamese students as well. So many more options for students, and that, from our perspective at Grok, we've seen an increase in institutions wanting to establish their own presence. Even during the pandemic last year, we actually most of our new hires were in Vietnam. So more competition, but the demand for study abroad that's maybe been a bit pent up is going to be released, and having engaged representatives on the ground is going to be really vital from our point of view.
Thank you. That brings our session to an end. We hope you found it insightful and have learned a lot about what's happening in Vietnam. Thank you so much to all our panellists and also Grok for sponsoring this session. Since this was a pre-recorded session, we couldn't take questions from the audience, but if you have any questions you'd like to ask the panellists, you can connect with them via the event platform, so please do. And if you'd like to know more about Grok, please visit their virtual booth and you can chat to them there. Thank you very much.